I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with Deborah Chow, Executive Producer and also Director on the limited series Obi-Wan Kenobi. Deborah, I'm fascinated about bringing back Darth Vader, and I know that that decision was not made lightly. What was it that ultimately tipped the scales in favor of having the story include such an iconic character?
I think the main reason was, we were looking at Obi-Wan as a character, and so we're looking back to go, where is he at this point, 10 years after Revenge of the Sith? And everything sort of always goes back to Order 66 and what happened at the end of Revenge of the Sith. So Anakin obviously was such a huge part of that, and it's such a weight that he's carrying. So really, that was the main reason, is that it felt like his character and where Obi-Wan would be at this moment would still be so tied to what had happened.
Yeah, that's that makes a lot of sense to me, and I was so happy to learn that this story would also include that, because after Revenge of the Sith, there's so many questions that remain unanswered, or did remain unanswered for so many of us fans. And as a Star Wars super nerd fan like me, I often think about the moment on the Death Star when Vader vanquishes Kenobi in A New Hope. Like, it's actually kind of imprinted on my retina. And so I'm curious about what your thoughts are on how important it was to use the series to kind of contextualize, or have an opportunity to contextualize, that iconic scene.
It was certainly something that, we didn't take lightly. Like, you don't start going into this territory without, really understanding obviously the responsibility that comes with it. So that was, a big part of the challenge of the series, and trying to actually figure out the storytelling within it, is that, we are between these two epic trilogies, and everybody, the fan base knows so well, um, every iota of it. So it was something that, on one side, we were obviously coming out of the prequels, so we're trying to have it feel honest and, where would these characters truly be? But we were also trying to obviously hand off and start to move to A New Hope with a lot of these characters. So I think with both, the relationship with Obi-Wan and Vader, as well as Obi-Wan and Leia, we were really looking obviously to A New Hope, and rewatching those scenes multiple times to try to have this sort of be a bit of a bridge between the two trilogies.
So were you a fan of Star Wars as a kid?
I was definitely a fan, and I was a genre kid. I was a little goth kid, so I was all about sci-fi and fantasy, and so this was always the pinnacle of everything for that.
And so, like, I can't even imagine if I get to work and realize a passion of mine as an adult from when I was a kid. So what does that kind of mean to you, to be able to shepherd this chapter in the story as like such a significant partner in this whole enterprise as director and executive producer?
It was definitely something I was not expecting, whatever happened. You don't really grow up going, oh yeah, one day I'm gonna, be directing Darth Vader. So I certainly had moments where you're like, I have no idea how I ended up here, and you're sitting there directing Darth Vader. It's, I think, like, in a lot of ways it was just luck. I just, I worked on Mandalorian, and this sort of came out of it. But I feel incredibly fortunate, to have been able to work with such iconic characters, and also just kind of continuing everything that George set up.
So um, I want to dig a little deeper in those moments when you're on set and you are directing Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan Kenobi and Hayden Christensen as Darth Vader, and of course so many of the other characters, but particularly those two. How do you wrap your head around that significant pop culture icon is currently in front of you, or both of them are in front of you, and consequently how significant a moment it is to bring him back with Hayden Christensen and Ewan McGregor on set? Like, were there moments where you felt a little kind of, where it felt surreal, and can you kind of take me back to maybe one of those moments?
It definitely felt surreal in moments, for sure. I remember the very first time, I think we were doing a camera test, and it was the very first time Ewan had ever, it wasn't even the proper costume, but he was kind of in something approximating it. And he walked out, and it was just like, oh my God, it's Obi-Wan Kenobi. And he just sort of fell so seamlessly back into the character. And it's a little shocking. Like, because there's such big characters, they're so iconic that it is a little crazy to have them standing in front of you. And I think that it's also something I've never experienced, where you're working with actors in these huge roles who have portrayed these characters so many years before. And not only that, they've been living with these characters in their own lives, where, Hayden is constantly, obviously, people coming up to him still every day. So there's such a relationship they have to these characters, and they've had a 20-year journey with them, and their lives have changed. And then I think one of the most interesting things for us was trying to do these characters at a different stage in their lives with these actors.
That's interesting, because I always wonder, you as the Helmer on the project, what what did you want to bring to the table with these two actors who obviously have such a history and they understand those characters? But you're so right, this is at a different time in their lives that they probably hadn't really contemplated before. So what kind of notes typically would you be giving both actors in that context?
I mean, I think for both of them, they obviously know their characters so well to start with, and they lived through the prequels, so they know everything that they did beforehand, and they lived it firsthand. So they're coming in, and in large part, what I tried to do is really just listen to them, because their instincts, they know these characters inside and out. But it was particularly interesting, I think, for Ewan, and Ewan is, such an incredible actor, but he just sort of embodies everything about it. So it's very seamless with him. It's very graceful, slipping into this role. With Hayden, it was really interesting because obviously, we have the transition into Vader. And so we were trying to create something where, he's not the Revenge of the Sith and he's not A New Hope. He's in the middle. And there is a little bit still of Anakin in there, still driving him. And so it was a very different portrayal in a lot of ways, to kind of have that meld in of the two characters together.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you all stuck the landing, because it could have gone really awry if this was in the hands of people who didn't quite understand the story, which obviously you do. I really love Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan Kenobi from the prequels. I loved him in this. What does he bring to the table as number one on the call sheet, apart from what you've already said? Is there a quality about him as the leading man that you really admired?
For me, he was obviously there, right? There's no show without him, and he was there before I was. There was a lot of development done on this before I came on board. He, for me, was like much more than an actor. He was a genuine creative partner. And I think, the way I saw it, at least, was that him also as a person, in addition to the role, he embodies so much of what Obi-Wan is, and there's so much in it that is him. And I think that's why I think the role and Ewan, they just meld so seamlessly, that that's in large part because he is so like that in real life. So for me, he not only was he this creative partner, but also he's just such a he's just such a classy, lovely person. So, for any show, I think when you're directing, having your number one on the call sheet just sort of lead, and, by example, and it sets a tone for the whole crew and cast. And I honestly could not have asked for a better partner on the show.
Honestly, I can't. I hear that a lot from directors. I can't imagine having the leading actor turn up on set and be a real pain in the backside. It would be horrible. It would ruin the whole production, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard enough job as it is. They're long enough days that, yeah, it can be tough.
Like, I'm sure. So I want to, before we move on to other parts of the series, the emotional highlight for me and for so many was Vader and Kenobi, the fight in episode 6. Everything about that sequence completely blew my mind, especially that teary-eyed Kenobi when he whimpers, he's sorry for all of it, and then Anakin slash Vader responds with half his mask blown off, and they're lit by their lightsabers, and then you hear Hayden's voice, and of course the legendary James Earl Jones. I just thought that was complete magic. So take me back to putting that scene together and what you thought of it when it was all done and dusted.
That scene for me was definitely the heart of the entire show. That's what we were building to. Everything was moving towards that scene. And we were in large part obviously trying to tell a character story with Obi-Wan. So the starting place is, he's carrying all this weight, he's carrying all this guilt, so many things that have come out of Revenge of the Sith. And so for us, obviously, the natural conclusion is that, he's got to find some release from that. And that is all based on the Anakin Vader relationship. So that scene was the pivotal scene of the whole series. And when we shot it, I've worked on, a lot of TV shows. I've never gone through something like this that felt so emotional and so sort of profound. And it wasn't, it's one bringing back these characters, but it was also bringing back these two actors who have their own relationship. So it was just incredibly emotional to shoot and to put together. And I think it just sort of brought everything together for me.
What was behind the choice to have James Earl Jones's voice mixed in with Hayden's? Because it was done so expertly, but it's just so effective.
That, I mean, really, that was the character for us, is that there's, especially with the broken mask, is that we're seeing that there is maybe potentially a little bit of Anakin still in there and driving. Anakin is Vader, but he's being, he's moving closer to becoming full Vader, as he will, obviously, as it goes on. And so it was kind of that mix of the two that I think was the most significant thing for us in that character, is showing, the mixture of those two characters together.
Yeah, and of course, Anakin, he demands, or he insists that he is no longer Anakin and he's only Vader, and we feel that, I guess, towards by the end of it, we also obviously feel it on the Death Star in A New Hope. But then, of course, by the end of the story, he gets to have, that moment of reckoning and realize that perhaps maybe he was always in there to begin with. And so, yeah, that journey with that character is pretty amazing, and it's so cool that you get to really foster this whole section of his background in real life. So yeah, anyway, let's move on to other things before we run out of time. So I love it how obviously the series opens with Kenobi. He's lost his connection to the Force. Qui-Gon's gone and he can't even connect with him anymore. It's a really nice insight into this character and the trauma that he would have endured at the end of Revenge of the Sith. So what were your thoughts on how the series contemplates him being untethered and traumatized?
I think not only Obi-Wan, but in large part, like a lot of the character work in the series, is that coming out of Order 66, just, it affected everybody's life in such a profound way. Even like from the twins to Obi-Wan to Vader to the character of Reva. So really it kind of became a through line for us emotionally, is that, what Obi-Wan was going through and how the world and the galaxy had changed so remarkably from that night. And obviously Anakin's part in that, it was just pivotal. And so I think in a lot of ways, the show is sort of about coming to terms with the aftermath of what happened on that night.
Yeah, and it's just this whole part of his story that I had always had question marks about. And I'm curious about whether there was much discussion amongst the creative team about whether to really turn up that PTSD or turn it down. Do you feel that you got it right in terms of how he was feeling and how he kind of progressed over those first few episodes?
There was quite a bit of discussion because at the same time, obviously coming out of Order 66 and everything he's carrying is genuine and it's there. But at the same time, we didn't want to lose sight of Obi-Wan. And we didn't want him like there's a version where I guess he could be hard drinking and really have gone down that road. But I don't know that would have felt entirely genuine to his character, because you still wanted it to feel like it is Obi-Wan. So for us, I think it was really trying to, and you and I, I think that this is a huge testament that how he portrayed it is retaining Obi-Wan about who he is and the light that's inside of him, but it's on his scale of carrying all that weight and that heaviness.
Yeah, that's right. It also brings me to this, like when you see, the Tatooine set, for example, being recreated by the incredible art department on the show, and other sets like that, and seeing Bail Organa and all this other stuff. Is there an element of balancing the nostalgia and established canon of the original films that so many of us hold so dear, and bringing something fresh and new to the franchise? And did you find that most challenging?
That was by far our biggest challenge, is that, obviously we're trying to tell a story that's in between two trilogies. and two legendary trilogies, no less, with characters that everybody knows what happened before and after to them. So, it obviously is a challenge as a starting place in terms of a story. So I think the biggest thing for us is that, we were just trying to find the honesty of, where these characters would truly be at this moment, for the legacy characters. But we did also try to balance it with some characters that were new that, would bring something that, the audience hasn't seen before or doesn't know everything about. So I think it was just about trying to find that balance between, the new and the old.
Yeah. Moses Ingram as Reva, I thought she was awesome, and I think most of the fans would have felt the same way. But yet, she still received so much abuse on social media by this very small subset of crazy people who just can't help themselves but to complain. What did you make of that whole controversy, I suppose, and how the cast and crew and the whole team kind of really rallied behind her to support her?
It was really hard, and it was also very hard because the show hadn't even come out. So she was getting judged and getting attacked, and she didn't even have anything. Like, it wasn't even based on her performance or any merit. So it was really hard, and I think it was very upsetting. We'd spent so much time together and, kind of become a family. So I was so honestly very proud when it was Ewan's idea. He wanted to do it, to make that video to speak out for her. And I think all of us just felt sort of solidarity, and also it's hard, like, for me as well. Like, I'm obviously like Asian and I'm a female in this business. So it's something that I think we just all really wanted to sort of protect her as much as we could.
Yeah, I just can't imagine how you'd feel, even yourself personally, like the misogyny and racism that is still prevalent in parts of our society is maddening. But anyway, like it is what it is, and we move forward. And if I ever do get to speak to Moses, I'll be telling her how incredible she was in that role. But you know what, Deborah, honestly, my favorite character, apart from I guess the iconic ones, is Rupert Friend.
Oh,
He
wow.
Oh my God, I love it. Took me a little while, and I remember going onto IMDb, like, who is this? Because of course I went into the show with no knowledge. I just wanted to be completely blown away, and I was. Um, what's he like to work with as an actor? I know we've interviewed him a few times. He's a really, really cool guy, but what was he like on set playing that incredibly awesome character?
He was awesome. Like, honestly, the whole cast were really great throughout the whole show. And Rupert had to do hours and hours of makeup, obviously, and go through the chair for that. So, the patience he showed with that. And then it's also, a lot of times with a lot of the Star Wars characters, it's incredibly hard to move in those outfits
Yeah.
and to carry it. They're wearing like pounds and pounds of armor and whatnot. So we were, I think, incredibly fortunate to have him. I just honestly wish we'd had more room and more time for him. Because I think he's a character that I'd love to see more of.
Maybe one day we can have a short little spin-off. My final question is, you were the sole director on the show, which is not really as common as people think for limited series like this. Usually you team up with a bunch of directors and you hand off the baton. What led to you being given the opportunity to helm the entire series, and how did you feel about being able to do it on TV as opposed to just doing it in a film?
For me, actually, I came to this. I had finished Mandalorian, and this project had been in development, for a number of years. So actually, by the time I came onto it, it was already sort of being transformed into a limited series, and there was a sole director. So the model was already kind of set. So I just inherited that model. For me, I've done quite a bit of TV. I was excited because getting to, especially with this, because it really felt like one big story. So getting to work sort of with the actors, through the whole show and, take their arc from beginning to end, it's really meaningful, and it's a lovely thing to be able to do if you can do it.
Oh, I can only imagine. I'm so grateful to Disney and Lucasfilm for bringing this to us fans. And Deborah, thank you for your time today. It was really insightful. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.